Hello, my name's Anthony Hake. I'm the Information Technology Specialist. I'm a digital inclusion activist, but most importantly, I'm a gamer. I'm here today to talk to you about the history of video game consoles. But what are we waiting around here for? Let's get started. Before we deep dive into the history of video games, I feel the need to clarify that this documentary won't be a history of video games themselves. We're specifically going to be focusing on video game consoles with a sprinkle of how video games affect us. Because, well, let's face it, video game history has already been done, and I can even recommend that if you want a really good one, check out High Score on Netflix because they really go behind the scenes, such as the development of like Doom and how Sonic was created by Sega as a weapon to leverage sales against Nintendo. Like it's really good. What I'm hoping to accomplish here is by looking at this history of video game consoles and the impact that they've had on the industry, that we can identify overall the impact that video game consoles, and by extension video games, have had on us as people. And for that, we're going to need to go really far back. We're going to need to go like beyond the history of the first video game because, let's face it, board games are almost the progenitor to video games. We don't really play video games for the video aspect all the time. Really, what we're interested in is the game part. We find entertainment in being stuck in this place with board games. The evolution of board games to video games really just incorporates the game console, the cartridges, the controller, the screen. That's all it really is just kind of like an evolution of board games, really. We live to be entertained and we constantly seek out that entertainment. So to go over this a little bit more, I'm going to meet with some local experts and see what they think. So let's go. All right, so I'm here with Kate Fultz, local video game expert, who has sunk thousands of hours into sandbox games like Minecraft and The Sims and Animal Crossing. Uh, is that really all that you're into? Is these sandbox games, or?
I like storytelling games too.
All right, so can you give me a few examples?
I really like Life is Strange, Detroit Becoming Human, The Walking Dead, the ones where you pick your own adventure.
Okay. So these games that you've listed off, they have kind of like a cinematic way of storytelling. And why do you think people chose to tell these stories via games rather than movies?
I've noticed they experiment a lot with different endings and different choices. They often show the results of the percentages and between the different choices, like say you save a girl versus you kill a girl. They'll have like 50-50 or 10-80.
Okay, so it changes based on the fact of the decisions that you're expected to make. So it really is just choose your own adventure, like you said earlier. Now, we know what's appealing about story-driven games. People want to be told a story. Now, what is the appeal of sandbox games, and why are they so addicting at first, but then you can just fall off of them just as fast?
Because you can just make anything you want. You can build a house or a prison, you can role play in it, but it can be overwhelming because it can be time consuming. And when you're busy a lot, you don't have the time to play all of that.
Right. And I can imagine it's kind of like starting a project and getting really far and then having to come back to it and, well, no one's writing documentation when they game, so it's not like they're going to remember what they were doing. Right. All right, so just a couple more questions for you. What makes you think, why are people attracted to these sandbox games? People that are let's say, quote unquote, overworked, overstressed. Do you think the simplicity of these open world, open ended games have their benefits, and why?
Yes, they have benefits. Mostly because you have the ability to just do whatever you want. You have freedom versus um, feeling controlled all the time by life. You can.
So the freedom of choice is almost therapeutic, you would say.
Yeah.
Okay, okay. Just one last question before we go. What's your favorite game of all time, if you had to pick one?
That's a hard question. I have too many favorites. There's too many good stories and too many good um, sandboxes that just let you do whatever you want. But if I had to pick a story one, probably Life is Strange. It's elaborate as hell.
Elaborate action. Right, so I'm here with amateur video gamer here. They seem to have a real knack for adventure games. What was your name again? Gwen?
Yeah.
All right, so Gwen, why don't you tell me what your favorite adventure game is?
That's a hard question to answer. There's a lot of adventure games that I've played.
All right, not a problem. We'll come back to it later. Uh, Maybe not so much of a fastball here, but what aspects of adventure games do you think are the most enjoyable?
Um, Probably like the freedom, I suppose. Like it's not it's not this life. It's another life where you're doing other stuff that's not boring 9 to 5. It's like, "Oh, I can shoot people and there's no repercussions. That's great."
Okay, okay. So it's kind of like akin to the interview with Kate, where we had said something about like being able to make all these choices is like freedom,
Yeah.
and becoming a new character, taking on this new persona, is also its own kind of freedom because you're not you. Yeah. Okay, I get that. And if that's the case, what do you value more in an adventure game? Realism or fantasy elements? Would you rather something be off the charts strange, or do you want it to reflect some aspects of your day to day?
I'd much rather have it be strange, but that's just because I'm me. Like I want to see a tentacle burst out of somebody's face. Like
All right, fair enough, fair enough. And I think what's most appealing about adventure games to a lot of people is that there's a predetermined beginning, middle, and end. And once they hit that end, they get a sense of completion. And do you feel it's better to have that sense of completion, or do you prefer an adventure that never ends?
I guess I prefer both. Like with Breath of the Wild, I have I have gone to so many lengths not to fight Ganon so I can just continue having this little place that I like exist in and can make food in and fight monsters and like get all these cool upgrades and like with Uncharted, I was so happy to just beat the whole game. Like I did all of it. I got everyone. Everything is done. Like I don't know. I guess kind of both. I guess it's
Okay, so in reflection, it's almost as though the it just depends on the setting and if you want to leave that world or not.
yeah. I would
Okay.
say.
And we're gonna wrap this up with our favorite question. You gotta tell me, what's your favorite adventure game?
Uh, Probably Okami.
Okay, solid choice, solid choice.
All right, now that we've talked to local experts about how they think video games are impacting their day to day lives, we're going to get into the meat of this documentary, and that's discussing various video game consoles and their impact that they may have had on history. I'm here today in beautiful Youngstown, Ohio, at Youngstown State University, where I'm going to be meeting with a friend of mine, Aaron Steiner, and he has brought several old consoles for me to look at and ask him questions about. And here's hoping that together we could figure out not just the history of these video game consoles, but also the impact they have left on mankind. So let's get started.
So I'm here with Aaron Steiner. Aaron, why don't you introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Aaron Steiner.
All right. I'm told that you were the president of the video game club here at YSU.
Yeah, I ran the video game club at YSU.
And would you mind telling me about like the kinds of video games that you saw at the video game club? Like, did you see a lot more people bringing gaming computers or gaming consoles?
A lot more people brought gaming consoles. They're a little bit easier to carry and stuff because you have like the small gaming consoles, like the Switch is like a little handheld, and all you got to do is worry about the dock. So it was real popular. You just take the Switch, put it on the dock, and boom, you have 8 people playing Smash Brothers on a TV. It's a lot more easy than dragging your whole gaming computer to campus because, as you know, like the more graphics you have in your gaming computer, it's a lot heavier to carry onto a college campus. We did, however, have one person, they brought their gaming computer to YSU, and it was pretty fun. I mean, we played Halo and stuff on there. It was like a little mini LAN party. That was cool. But usually people brought their gaming consoles. A little bit more convenient, a little lighter to carry.
Okay, well that's cool. That's definitely cool. And well, I see that you brought some consoles for us today. Why don't you pull one of those out and tell us a little bit about it?
Yeah, we got a whole bunch of consoles today, as you can see. I'll start with one of my personal favorites. Now this was a classic. This is called the Sega Dreamcast. Now, Sega actually came out with it to compete with the Nintendo 64 back in 1997, and it was released in 1998. And what's cool about this is it actually played CDs. It was kind of like the PlayStation, where it played discs instead of cartridges. These are the controllers for them. Now, as you can see, it kind of looks like the original Xbox, and I'll get to why that looks like that later. But this was a pretty cool controller. So you can see they have different colors. Like in the 70s, they had like everything was wood. So you had like wooden clocks, wooden Ataris. But like in the 90s, that's when everything was like this cool transparent blue color and green color. Kind of like that with, like you can see with the Nintendo 64, same concept. It had that transparent color, really, really cool color. Best thing about these controllers is, look right here. See how it has a little screen? Take it out, it's actually a little mini Game Boy. So Sega, actually they teamed up with Nintendo to make this. And what it is actually a little Game Boy, and it's also a memory card, which is really cool. So you can save your data, but you can also play games on it. For example, when Sonic Adventure Part 1 and Part 2 came out, they actually teamed up with Tamagotchi to make the Chow Garden, which is now like a staple in the Sonic franchise. But with the Chow Garden, you can actually raise your little chows just like Tamagotchis, and it saves your data. And guess what? So when you're on a road trip and you come home, you just plug in this and boom, it's in your gaming console, which was really revolutionary for the time. Something we take for granted now with like cell phones. But you have to remember, in the 90s, they didn't really have cell phones yet.
That's really cool. Would you say that the save cartridge for the Sega console there, is it reminiscent of the Game Boy Color or the Game Boy Pocket? Do you think that the design was inspired by the Game Boy?
Yeah, so back then, people like keeping things simple, so they usually only had an A and a B button. The reason for that wasn't the limitation of technology, but it was because you can only do so many games on here. So they kind of organized it a little bit. And it kind of has like the calculator graphics. So like, as you can see, it has a screen, has the calculator colors, just like the Game Boy has calculator colors. And I would say that the graphic fidelity of this is kind of in between the Game Boy and like one of these like toys you would get at Burger King and Happy Meals. You would get these. So this is Tony Hawk Pro Skater from the Burger King Happy Meal, and the graphics are kind of in between this and this, which honestly for the time when 1998, this had a lot of graphics in it back then. But that wasn't the main thing, because the main thing was playing games on the consoles. Usually people, like for the football fans out there, a lot of the football fans love the Sega Dreamcast because they can do all of their plays on this little Game Boy, and nobody could see their plays for the football games. So that was pretty cool.
All right, and you mentioned earlier that the controllers are kind of they're like Xbox controllers. You said that. Can you elaborate on that a little more?
Well, before the Xbox came out, the Dreamcast was actually out in the era of the PlayStation 2, Nintendo GameCube, and the Xbox, the original Xbox. So since this came out in 1998, it was a little bit less, it didn't have that much graphics in it compared to the other three giants. So this played CDs, okay, but the PlayStation 2 was able to play DVDs. And the reason why, one of the main factors that's failing is the Dreamcast actually didn't have enough graphics to play DVDs. They only had enough graphics to play CDs. And as you know, CDs play audio only and DVDs play video only. So with that in mind, they didn't have enough graphics. So it kind of fell behind. Also, a lot of people weren't really buying it because Sega didn't really market it as much. Sega was kind of cocky back then because they made the Sega Genesis, which had so many people bought it and stuff that they thought the name would just sell. So they just had a commercial where it said Dreamcast and it showed like a little spiral, and that was about it for their marketing. So I think it's between those two factors, but it was a classic. It had a lot of really, really good games. So anyways, with the Xbox, you said, when I said before, this is kind of similar. Microsoft actually purchased the architecture for the Dreamcast when it was failing. So they kind of like bought them out. They do that with a couple companies kind of thing. Kind of like how like Disney bought Marvel in a way. Like they don't really own it, but they do kind of own it. Kind of like that. So they bought the architecture from it and they kind of made the Xbox base around it. And the Xbox was actually supposed to have a Game Boy screen in the middle. But since Microsoft's competing against Nintendo, Nintendo didn't give them the rights to use the Game Boy. So that's why you have that giant X on the original controller of the Xbox. That was actually supposed to be a Game Boy in there. I wish I had one to show you, but I don't own a original Xbox. I have a 360, but not that. But yeah, so if you can like go on Google Images and look at a picture of it, then you would see that that's where the Game Boy was supposed to be.
All right, I think that's enough for the Sega console there. Let's move on to something else.
Oh, okay.
So we're over here at the Youngstown State University fountain. I'm praying it doesn't turn on, but until it does, let's talk about the PlayStation, the Sony PlayStation. Aaron, have you brought one with you today?
I do. I actually got the PlayStation Mini. So this was like when they released the PlayStation 2, a lot of parents wouldn't buy like their kids the PlayStation 2. So Sony combated that by actually, they redesigned the PS1, but they made it with a built-in CRT TV inside of it. So you're able to play all the games through this, which was really good. And actually, you could plug it into your car. So for road trips, you can actually play like your favorite games like Spyro the Dragon or Crash Bandicoot or Metal Gear Solid. You can play all those games on here through the little mini CRT TV. The GameCube actually did something similar, but it was very rare. They didn't really sell too many of them. But this was the first gaming console that did that.
And why do you think it took so long for a trend like this to take off? Like, we're seeing this now with the Nintendo Switch, obviously, and given its success, we're seeing a lot more imitators. But this seems like it was before its time. Why do you think it really didn't take off?
I think this actually did take off. This actually sold a lot of money. Why they didn't do that with the modern consoles is because the consoles had a lot more graphics in them, so they were a lot more bigger. Like, you know how like the PS2, PS3, they're huge. It's like a giant old-fashioned VCR player, but with modern technology. Like, you know, it's a giant bulky thing. But with this, you know, look how small it is. It's super light. One of the engineers at Sony actually pitched this idea because he had a kid who would always whine on road trips because, you know, he's going on business trips all the time. And he pitched this idea. He's like, listen, we got to make TV on here. And that's what they did. They made the TV on here. And honestly, it still works today. Like, it's pretty good. Like, when I go on road trips and stuff, like when my mom drives me places, I play this all the time. And it's fun. It's good, you know.
It's really cool. Is it battery powered? Do you have to hook it up to the car every time? Like, how does it turn on?
It's actually, it plugs into the, you know, like that thing, it's not used anymore, but it used to be like the old, like the cars with the cigarette lighter in it. Now it's used for charging, but like it was back in the day, it was a cigarette charger. So they kind of like took advantage of that because they were trying to promote to get people to stop smoking. So they tried to replace the cigarette part of the car with the battery part of the car. So that's kind of like it's trying to like get people to game instead of smoke, which was really, really good idea actually back then in the 90s.
Yeah, because I mean that was the coolest thing, was puffing up with your buddies. But if you could find alternative uses for those ports, I can see why that would take off. Now, I'm assuming you've turned this on and you've played with it a bit. What's the sound like? I mean, Sony's known for their high definition, and I feel like they're sacrificing some of that quality by going mobile. So what's your impression of it?
Honestly, you think that they would, but actually the sound is probably the sound's better than the picture, because Sony, as you know, they made the Sony Walkman, which before the iPod exists, there was the Walkman. So you can play cassette tapes inside of like your Walkman and play it. They had it in like Guardians of the Galaxy like 1 and 2. The main character used a Sony Walkman all the time, like to listen to music on, so that's kind of like that. But they actually use the same exact speakers, like the same architecture for the speakers of the Sony Walkman to put into here. So it actually sounds really good. And if you didn't like the speakers, say for example, if you're driving in like a pickup truck, then you have an option for headphones. So you can actually plug in your headphones into.
And that's just like a 3.5 millimeter jack?
Yeah. So actually, like if you have the old iPhone head jacks, it actually plays. Like before, when they actually had a headphone jack, the iPhones, you actually can use that iPhone jack to listen to it, because that's what I do. Like I'll put in my headphones, like I'll be at like a Starbucks coffee having my morning coffee, and I'll just play this. Like I'll put my headphones in and people will come up and like, whoa, is that the PlayStation 1 with TV built in? And I'll say, yeah, it's pretty good. I'm like playing Final Fantasy 9. Pretty good.
That's great. I'm glad to hear that you had like such a good time with this. Now, we're here to discuss the history of video games and the mark that each console has left on that history. What do you think this was the progenitor of? What revolution did this console start?
The PlayStation in general started, the most important thing was the CD. Now, Sega released the Sega CD a few years back, but it failed because it was an extension of the Sega Genesis. But PlayStation took that idea and ran with it. Now, since Sony makes music with the CDs, they thought, oh, well, we don't need to pay somebody else to manufacture CDs. We're just going to go to our warehouse, take CDs, and put games in them. And that's how they were able to make so many copies of CDs. Like if you go back into Pizza Hut in the 90s, they actually gave out demos of like Metal Gear Solid on the CDs that you can take and play them. Like I remember people going to Pizza Hut, and I had a Nintendo 64 growing up, and I was like, man, I wish I had a PlayStation so I can get demos at a fast food place. Like that's awesome.
Yeah, don't you
like
wish that like they handed out like demo cartridges for the
N64? But see the 64, like they're really expensive. Like see this, like this is expensive to do. This is like a hard drive. Like this is basically like a USB drive, like if you're comparing it. And USBs weren't even out in the 90s. They only had floppy disks, which are the save icon in Microsoft Word. But back then, they didn't have flash drives, and this was like the flash drive. People don't really talk about it, but it really was, and they're expensive. Like Nintendo barely profited. That's why all the first-party games, or that's why the third-party games were only on the PlayStation, because they didn't have to pay to get a chip manufactured. They just went to Sony's warehouse, boom, and like just scanned it onto a CD, kind of like how we burned mixtapes on CDs for our cars.
Okay.
So I think the PlayStation really nailed it. The fact that it was its own console made it so it made the CDs take off. Like the Sega CD was going to take off, but the Sega Genesis didn't have that much graphics in it. It did for the time because it had blast processing, but the fact that it had to like take graphics from the actual console to the Sega CD instead of just being its own thing. And being its own thing is what sells because it's simple for people to understand.
Right. And it seems that the simpler a console is, the more people are drawn to it. The more normal people are drawn to it.
Yeah, the more normal. Yeah, exactly. Because a lot of people like overcomplicated stuff because they understand it. But if you don't understand it, you're not going to get the UI. Like even Microsoft Windows 10 has like a confusing UI. Like it's not as simple as Windows XP was. Like you go on there, I mean, it's easy to use, but like it's still not as simple. So people downloading games and going through all that, it's more of a step up. That's why people don't really play games on their computers. They just kind of buy consoles. It's easy. You just push a button and you play it. And that's probably the best way to market things.
All right, so we're over here on the other side of campus. We are situated outside of the Student Center, actually. And Aaron, is that a Nintendo Entertainment System I see?
Ooh, it is a Nintendo Entertainment System.
Good Lord, I've never actually seen one of those in the flesh. Why don't you tell me a little bit about it?
This is actually genuinely my favorite gaming console of all of them. It's an absolute classic.
All right, and why don't you tell me what that console means to you, since it's such a personal favorite?
Well, back then games were a lot simpler, and like when we were playing, like, let's say if you want to play the Mario Brothers 3 game, like it doesn't save your progress. So if you turn it off, you go back to the beginning. But also if you die, you go back to the beginning. So it was kind of fun to like marathon. It was like an adventure. Let's see how far we can get. And when I was little, my cousins were like a lot older than me, so they had the NES, and we'd always play it over there for like Christmas and Thanksgiving. And it was just really fun. You know, we would sit there and we'd marathon it. Like Christmas Eve, we'd all gather around and like see how far we can get in Mario 3. Like, oh wow, we got to the giant area, World 4, or we got to the ice world in World 5. Like it was really fun. You know, it was just a fun experience. You know, it was a lot simpler. All you did is put it in the cartridge, close it up, and it plays. You know.
That's an experience that we really don't see all too much anymore because of all the quality of life changes. Mm-hmm. Now, speaking of quality of life changes, let's talk about those controllers for a minute.
Ooh, yeah. Now, the controllers were really cool. Now, you used to like big giant controllers, like the big Xbox controller or the big Nintendo Switch or your gaming keyboard and gaming mouse. But with this, it was so simple, you know. All you had was a D-pad. A and B button, start, select. So it was really easy and fit in your hands, and especially if you were younger, it was like real small. But now, like now when we have big hands, it just fits real nice. They wanted to call it the Nintendo Gaming System, but they call it Nintendo Entertainment System because they kind of wanted the Nintendo to be like the next water box where people gather around and just kind of make it like an entertainment system, kind of like the equivalent would be like a Blu-ray player or a smart TV today, where people kind of gather around that media center. So they did that, and they actually designed it to look like a VCR to market it that way. It was more mature looking than the Atari. So you can take this out. So this is your Nintendo tape. I got actually one of my favorite games, Super Mario Brothers 3. It's a really good one. So with this, you take it. It's kind of like at the time VCRs were popular. That was a really popular form of watching movies. So you'd put it in here, press it down, and close it up, push the power button, and it plays. It fit in a lot of good.
It set a lot of ripples. It really changed how America viewed video games now, because I remember very distinctly that video game consoles were difficult to sell in the United States because they weren't necessarily a toy. They had to be marketed with a screen, and places that sold game consoles, they didn't want to have just a display screen, just so they can show that the console works. So do you know anything about how they overcame that challenge here in America? Because over in Japan, there's screens everywhere. But how did they adapt to this new market?
Well, the whole thing about gaming consoles was you wanted to be able to play the arcade game. Like people would go to the arcade, put in pennies and stuff, or like quarters or whatever. They put in those to play the arcade games at the arcade, but parents didn't like driving their kids to the arcades because they never wanted to go home, had a lot of germs on there, all the kids were touching it and stuff. So like they wanted to let their kids have safe environments at home to play games. And it's actually really kind of a funny story. That's how Chuck E. Cheese started, because arcade games got really sketchy. So people in like the arcades were like, a lot of older kids came in there and they were like doing like drugs and stuff. So the reason why Chuck E. Cheese exists is they actually made a safe arcade game, like a whole thing, like an arcade specifically for kids to combat that. But when arcades got real sketchy, that's when the NES came out. It was coincidence. So the fact that the NES came out during arcades getting sketchy, less parents were taking them to the arcades, so more parents were buying game consoles because they felt safer with their kids playing it at home. Don't understand, like, I just don't get it. Like, as an indie developer, I just don't get how these AAA studios hire hundreds of people just to make video game graphics when, like, you can just have one person go to the asset store and buy all of the assets. Like, I just don't get it.
Beep. We could fix all that in post. All right.
It's very elaborate. It's very elaborate.